everyone, and welcome back to episode 46 of the Pod of the Life podcast. So grateful that you're listening, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on YouTube. Go ahead, give it a like, subscribe, whatever you can do on those apps. Just go ahead and do it because that makes me feel really good about myself. So thank you for listening. I'm super excited that you're here today. It is the day after Easter that I'm recording this. And I gotta say, I'm riding a high right now. Easter was such a good time at our church yesterday. I had such a great time with my family. Of course, all the kids hunted some Easter eggs. My kids got way more than they should have gotten for Easter. You guys know what I mean? Like, I felt like maybe I got spoiled when I was a kid. I don't know. I'm sure I did. But my kids got like 8 baskets from like different family members and people. It was just crazy. They got so much. I'm so happy for them. But it was like everything. We went to some things on Saturday and then did some stuff on Sunday. And we just had to unload our car multiple times with like the baskets and the candy. I don't know. It just felt like a lot, but it doesn't matter. We should dive into the episode today. You know, at one time though, I remember my mom used to hide Easter eggs for us big kids when we got older, and she would hide one egg for each of us. And one time I had an egg that was literally hid underneath a sprinkler underground. Like I had to dig this egg out. And I was like, what in the world is going on? But it was so much fun. And anyway, that's besides the point. We're going to dive into this week's episode. That was just a fun little tidbit from my life. But here's what I want to talk about today. Something that I wish more people would say in 2023. Something that I wish more people would say in 2023. And it's this. And this is going to be the title of the episode. I don't know. I don't know. I wish more people in 2023 would say, I don't know. It feels like we have so many people who are experts in everything and so many different voices that we could listen to all over us on social media, on YouTube, in church, like everybody. There's so many people, but I feel like so many people feel like they need to be the experts and they just don't know how to say the words, I don't know. I was having a conversation after our Easter service yesterday, and for those of you who may not know, I'm the youth and kids pastor at our church, so we had a ton of kids yesterday in our kids' church in Zeal Kids, and it was great, but of course, with lots of kids, sometimes you get children with behavioral issues, which is very common, and I had a teacher, one of our leaders on our Zeal Kids teams, she asked me after service, she's like, hey, what is our disciplinary policy for, kids who are having a hard time, or she kind of just gave me the lowdown on this, on what had happened that day. And as she was talking and telling me the situation, I was trying to think of an answer and I couldn't think of anything. And I began to have this kind of panic attack on the inside of me because I was like, I'm the kids pastor. I need to have a good answer for her. I should know what the policy is, or if not, I should make up a policy on the spot, right? Like I should have something to say to her. And, it took everything I had inside of me to say this, which is what I said to her, and I'm very proud of myself. I said, I don't know. Let me talk with some people who have been in kids ministry, who know how to do these things. Let me talk with people who work with kids and who might have a good answer for you, and then I'll get back to you. That's what I said to her. I really wanted to just make something up on the spot so that way it looked like I knew what I was talking about. It looked like I had thought about this before. And by no means am I an expert when it comes to kids ministry. So anyway, all that to say, I didn't have an answer. And I said, I don't know, which I think is great. But I think so many of us, we always want to have an answer, and we always want to make it look like we know what we're talking about. Maybe we feel like we're going to be looked down on if we say the words, I don't know, when somebody asks us a question. But can I tell you what that really is? What that's really a sign of? You might think it's insecurity. You might think it's portraying a good self-image. You might think a bunch of different things. But here's what it really boils down to. It really boils down to pride. Many of us feel like we have to have an answer for everything because we're so prideful. We want people to look at us. We want people to notice how smart we are. We want people to see us and all the hard work we put in and all the things because we have so much pride. But I want to read a scripture to you today from 1 Kings chapter 3. It's about our boy Solomon, King Solomon. And at this point, he had become king. And you guys have probably heard this part of the story. I'm going to read it really quick, just a few verses. 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 5 through 9. It says this: the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, and God said, "Ask what you wish me to give you." Then Solomon in the dream said, "You have shown great faithfulness to your servant David, my father, according as he walked before you in truth, righteousness, and uprightness of heart towards you. And you have reserved for him this great faithfulness, that you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day," speaking about himself. But he says this: "And now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in a place of my father David, yet I am like a little boy. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people who are too many to be numbered or counted. So give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil, for who is capable of judging this great people of yours?" Solomon nails it here. He literally says, "I don't know what I'm doing. God, I need wisdom. I don't know." Don't you just wish more people would say, "I don't know" in 2023? I really do. If you go further on in the passage, in chapter 4, verse 29, it said, "God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind, like the sand that is on the seashore." Because Solomon was humble enough to say, "I don't know," and smart enough to ask for wisdom from the one who is all-knowing, God gave him wisdom and said to him, "There will be none like you ever again. There's been none like you before with this wisdom, and there will be none like you again with the wisdom that I have given you." This is an incredible passage, I think, and I just want to give you a couple quick observations I make from this part of Solomon's story, because as you know, Solomon was the most wealthy, richest, most wisdom-filled man, king, to have ruled in Israel. One of the most wisdom-filled and wealthiest person in the entire world, actually, which is crazy to think about in the entire history of the world. So I think we can get a couple observations of wisdom, of this idea of just being able to say, "I don't know." So let's check it out. First observation I make is this: wisdom begins when pride ends. Wisdom begins when pride ends. Or you could say it like this: wisdom begins with humility. There is no mention of pride in this passage, but I think that we can use logic to get to this point. Had Solomon said, "I don't know what I'm doing," or had he said this, that he knows what he's doing, had he said, "God, I got it all figured out," he never would have received wisdom from God. If he would have been too prideful to ask, he wouldn't have gotten what he did. Now, I think many of us lack wisdom simply because we're too prideful. Many of us lack wisdom because we're too prideful. We wonder why we can't figure out how to get to the place in life that we want to be at. We feel stagnant. Maybe we feel like we have no strategy for what we're doing in our jobs, in our marriages, in our relationships. I would bet if you feel like this, that pride might be the root of your issue. And here's the deal. Many of us don't actually want to admit we're prideful. It's really easy to kind of cover up pride and say it's something else, say you just want to be the best or like whatever. But I think many of us don't like to admit that we're prideful. But I really do believe that many of us don't have the wisdom we want simply because we won't ask, because we're too prideful to ask. I know for me personally, when it comes to I can be prideful in certain areas of my life, and one of the areas in my life I can be prideful is when it comes to working around my house, when it comes to doing DIY projects and fixing things. And I know I've shared it on the podcast before, but I have a really hard time asking people for help because I don't want people to think less of me. I don't want them to think that I'm not like man enough to fix my own house. And I recognize that, but sometimes I still operate in this pride. I don't like to ask people for help. I have to really trust somebody and know them in order for me to ask for help. And oftentimes that just comes from a place of pride. Wisdom will only begin where pride ends. Wisdom starts with humility. So if you want wisdom, we just need to be humble. Number 2, wisdom is birthed in experience. Wisdom is birthed in experience. Now, we don't overtly learn from this passage that wisdom is birthed in experience, but God gives Solomon divine wisdom. He just asked for it, and God gives it to him. However, I looked up the definition of wisdom in a Bible dictionary, and one word that was in the definition of wisdom was experience. It was almost like experience was synonymous with wisdom. Now, don't quote me on saying that, but the word experience was there. Now, this may feel obvious, but I really feel this, that oftentimes wisdom is birthed in experience. What do I mean? When I walk through something in life, I can now speak to somebody who is walking through the same thing because I've been there. I have hindsight. And hindsight's always 20/20, right? 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3-4 says this, that God comforts us in all our affliction so that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the same comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. Here's what that verse is saying. That when we walk through something difficult, something hard, maybe it's something good, maybe it's starting a business, maybe it's starting a family. When we walk through anything in life, we now have that experience and have that wisdom and have the ability to speak into the lives of others who are walking through similar things. I can speak better to someone who has kids because I have kids. If I were to go to a parent and I didn't have any kids, like I don't know if you guys ever did this, if you do have kids now, maybe you saw like parents at a restaurant and you're like, the kids are playing on an iPad and you're like, I will never be the parent that lets my kid play on an iPad. And then you have kids and you're like, these kids are going to destroy me. They're literally killing me as we speak. Here's an iPad to distract them. You become that parent. Because when you're not a parent, you can't speak to parents. You don't know what it's like to have kids. You might have babysat kids before. You might have gotten a taste, but you've never been responsible for a child 24/7, keeping a kid alive. So now that I have kids, I feel like I can relate better to parents. I can speak to parents out of my own experience. It just doesn't feel the same when I try to speak to someone who's in a place where I've never been before. Does that make sense? That's why it's hard to lead to places that you've never been before as well. People can't follow you to a place that you've never been to. Are you guys catching what I'm saying? But if you've been through something, odds are you can speak to somebody who's currently going through the same thing. Let me give you an example. Maybe you've been through the foster care system and you're now on the other side of it and you're thriving in life. Or maybe the foster system was something you went through and it was difficult for you, but you made it through. And now you have the ability to speak to the lives of other children who are currently experiencing the same thing. Like when you go through something, you can speak to somebody in that situation. If you've lost a loved one, it's easier to comfort someone who just lost their loved one. Not only do you know what it feels like, but the other party will better receive your thoughts and what you have to say. For example, if I wanted to start my own business, I wouldn't take advice from some random stranger with 12 followers on TikTok who claims they know what they're doing. I wouldn't do that. I would go find somebody who I know or who somebody I know knows, and somebody who's been successful in the business field and knows how to start a business and knows the ins and outs. Like that's the person I would go to and I would trust because they've been where I'm trying to go. Are you guys catching what I'm saying? So here's how you and I get wisdom. We keep living life. If you want wisdom, just keep living because odds are you will walk through something, you'll go through something good or bad, and it will give you the ability to experience things that other people are going to experience, and you can now talk to them. Not only do you have to keep living life, but you have to ask God for wisdom. James chapter 1 says this, and I'm going to read a few verses to you and make it make sense. He says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials." Now you're thinking, Austin, what does this have to do with wisdom? Knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let that endurance have its perfect result so that you may be perfect and complete. Listen to this, lacking nothing. The next verse says this, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given him." If you want wisdom, ask God. But remember, wisdom is experience. And in order to lack nothing, the book of James says you have to walk through trials of various kinds that test your faith and produce endurance, and endurance will have its perfect result in you lacking in nothing. So if you ask God for wisdom, odds are God's going to give you something to walk through. Now that could be good. It could be bad. It could be a trial. It could be a success. But if you want wisdom, I guarantee you if you ask for it, God will say, here's something to do. Here's something to walk through. Here's your next assignment. And through those things that you're walking through and experiencing, you will learn things and you will be able to speak to people who will now later walk through the same things. I don't know. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But when you ask for wisdom, I feel like oftentimes God gives you a situation to walk through. It's not always about the destination, but it really is about the journey, because on the journey is where you learn. On the journey is how you actually, the journey is where you learn to sustain living in the destination. Like the Israelites, let's take it back to the Bible. The Israelites would not have been able to thrive in the promised land, and they still really struggled as they got into the promised land, but God had them, number one, waiting because they were disobeying him and they weren't following him. So they had to go through this season in the wilderness to learn some things and to go through some things in order to succeed and thrive in the promised land. Are you guys catching what I'm putting down? So number two, wisdom is oftentimes birthed in experience. And lastly, if you want wisdom, I need you to ask yourself this question. What is God teaching me right now? What is God teaching me right now? And the answer lies in what you're currently living, in what you're currently walking through. Did a pipe just break? Ask yourself, what is God trying to teach me? Is he trying to teach me patience because I got to fix this pipe? Is he trying to teach me a new skill that I could later use to help somebody? Like, what's he trying to do? Did somebody just hurt you? What's God trying to teach me? Is he trying to teach me to forgive, to walk out his love and his mercy and his forgiveness? Whatever you're walking through, good or bad, ask yourself, what is God teaching me in this? What is God trying to show me in this? And Romans 8:38 says this, obviously God works all things for the good. He uses betrayal, he uses pain, he uses seasons of waiting, he uses the miraculous, he uses the mundane, he uses all things for the good. He will take the things that seem terrible and use them to teach you something for later on in life or to help somebody else. He's speaking to you right now through what you're currently walking through, but the question is, are you listening? Are you paying attention? That's the question. Now, I know I started this episode with the title, I don't know, because I do wish more people in 2023 would just say the words, I don't know. Because when you say the words, I don't know, and then you say, I can get back to you later, I'll go figure that out, what you're really doing is you're giving God an opportunity to give you wisdom, to impart something to you, to teach you something. When you say, I don't know, that actually stems from a place of humility. And when you try to find an answer, like I was trying at the beginning of the podcast, like I was telling you, that actually stems from a place of pride. And pride never leads to wisdom, but humility always does. Humility will allow you to walk through things and will allow God to teach you. And when you're humble, God can shape you and God can mold you. And that is how you gain wisdom. It's how you gain wisdom. In 2023, I want you to be able to say, I don't know, so that way you can go and get some wisdom. I'm tired of people pretending like they know what's going on, like they have all the answers. I know that we have Google and we can just look things up, but it is still okay to say, I don't know, and to do your own research and to walk through your own stuff. Are you guys picking up what I'm putting down today? Now, maybe as we close, you need wisdom to parent. Maybe you need wisdom to get a promotion. Maybe you need some wisdom from God to get a strategy to start your business. Whatever the case, first thing that needs to be done is you need to set your pride aside and you need to ask God for help. Then you need to find somebody who's been where you're trying to go and ask them questions and humble yourself enough to ask them questions. And then you need to pay attention to what you're currently walking through. God, what in the world are you teaching me on April 10th in 2023? What situations am I going through right now that you are using to teach me something? I feel like God uses everything. He uses when my kids are sick, he's trying to teach me something. When I get a raise, he's trying to teach me something. When something doesn't work out the way I wanted to, he's trying to teach me something. Like he is always trying to teach us something. There's always something to be learned. There's always something to be gained in every experience that you walk through. I don't believe that there's really any neutral events in life. I do think that everything happens for a reason and that God can use those things to teach us, or we can remain prideful and not learn a single thing. And I pray that in a few years from now that I will have humbled myself today, that in a few years from now I will be better off because I've learned from what I've walked through. And I think it's very evident to see as history continues to repeat itself that we are a humanity that is full of pride and that has not yet learned from the experiences that we've had. So let's change the paradigm. Let's begin to look at what has happened in our lives and say, God, what in the world are you showing me today? Amen. That's when I'm in church and I don't know how to close something, I just say, are you guys with me? I say, amen. And they say amen. You guys know what I'm talking about? It's just things preachers say, all right? Especially when I don't know how to close something. I say, worship team, come back up. If I could just have the worship team on my podcast, just come and close us off. Oh, it just feels so good. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys. Be okay with saying the words, I don't know. And I guarantee you when you say that, God will give you some wisdom. But the Life Podcast, that is what I got for you today. Thanks for joining for another episode of The Pod. We'll see you next week.